Jake had never believed in legends. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't have time for old stories. But there was something different about this mission. His crew had received a distress signal from a faraway planet, one that was deep in enemy territory. They had been sent to rescue an alien princess, but Jake had no idea that this rescue would change everything as their ship entered the planet's atmosphere. The crew prepared for battle. The alien empire had a reputation for being ruthless, and no one who ventured into their territory came back the same. The mission felt like a suicide mission, but Jake and his crew had no choice. The princess had been captured, and if they didn't save her, it could mean the end of the galaxy's fragile peace. The team landed in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. They knew the risk, but they were determined. Jake led the group as they stealthily made their way through the dense alien jungle. It was dark, and the air smelled strange, like burning metal and earth. Every sound seemed magnified, making Jake feel like they were being watched. But his mind was focused on one thing: getting the princess out alive. The mission didn't go as planned. They had underestimated the enemy's presence, and before they knew it, they were surrounded. Fire lit up the night sky. The soldiers of the enemy empire came at them from all directions, their weapons firing relentlessly. Jake ducked behind a massive rock, trying to regroup his team. "We're outnumbered, Jake," one of his teammates yelled. "Can't hold them off much longer." Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His team was good, but this was a battle they weren't prepared for. There was no way out. The alien soldiers were closing in fast. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw an alien soldier who had taken a position on top of the hill. She was different from the others. She had long, dark hair that glinted under the dim lights, and her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Jake's heart skipped a beat when he realized who she was: the princess they had come to save. She wasn't just any princess. She was the ruler's daughter, one of the most important figures in the galaxy. And now she was being held captive in this enemy fortress. Jake's mind raced, thinking of ways to free her. He couldn't fail. With a quick nod to his team, he launched himself from cover. He sprinted towards the enemy lines, his blaster drawn, the world around him spinning with the chaos of battle. His crew followed close behind, but Jake was faster. He wasn't going to let this chance slip away. He had to reach the princess. The enemy soldiers turned toward him, surprised by his sudden charge. Jake fired, taking out 2 soldiers in quick succession. His heart pounded, but there was no time to be afraid. He kept moving, dodging fire, and taking cover whenever he could. Every step took him closer to the princess, and he could feel her presence, even though she was still out of reach. As he neared the princess's position, he saw something that made his stomach drop. A massive alien warlord stood beside her, holding her captive by the wrist. The warlord had an imposing figure, and his eyes glowed with a cruel intensity.
Ow.
Jake knew this was it. If he didn't act now, the princess would be lost forever. With a grunt, Jake leapt forward, firing his blaster at the warlord. The shots rang out, and the warlord staggered back in surprise, but he quickly regained his footing. He roared in fury, drawing his massive sword from his side. Jake barely dodged the incoming strike, rolling to the side as the sword smashed into the ground, leaving a crater where he had been moments before. Jake's mind was racing. He couldn't defeat this warlord with just a blaster. He needed to think quickly. He could see the princess struggling in the warlord's grip, her face pale and desperate. Jake's heart went out to her, but there was no time for sympathy. He had to save her. "Jake, get out of there," his teammate shouted. But Jake wasn't listening. Couldn't. Not now. He grabbed a nearby grenade from his belt and threw it at the warlord. The explosion was loud, shaking the ground beneath. "Him!" the warlord screamed as the blast threw him to the ground. It wasn't enough to kill him, but it gave Jake the opening he needed. In a split second, Jake tackled the warlord, knocking the sword from his hand. The princess gasped as she broke free from the warlord's grip. She had been watching, waiting for her chance. With a look of determination in her eyes, she ran toward Jake, helping him hold off the warlord. Together, they fought. The warlord was strong, but Jake had something else: sheer willpower. He knew the legend, The stories that had been told about a human who once defeated powerful enemies in the name of peace. The galaxy's history had always painted the human of legend as a mythical figure, a warrior who had saved countless civilizations and brought an end to brutal wars. Jake never believed those stories. But as he fought side by side with the princess, he began to realize that maybe, just maybe, stories weren't entirely fiction. With one final blow, Jake sent the warlord crashing to the ground. He was done. The battle was won, but the cost was high. The enemy had retreated, but Jake could feel the weight of the princess's gaze on him. She had seen something in him. Something she had never expected. Jake stood, breathing heavily, his body aching from the fight. He turned to the princess, who was now standing tall beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't believe it," she whispered. Jake was confused. "What?" The princess looked at him, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's true, then. You really are the human of legend." Jake froze. He had heard the stories, but he never believed they were real. And now, standing on this alien world, with the princess's eyes locked on him, he had no choice but to face the truth. The legends weren't just stories, they were real. And somehow Jake had become the very thing he had once thought was impossible. Jake stood there, his heart still racing, sweat dripping down his forehead. The alien warlord lay motionless at his feet, defeated. But as Jake caught his breath, he heard something that made his stomach turn. A voice, cold and commanding, echoed across the battlefield. Enough. The voice was sharp, clear, and filled with authority. Jake turned to see the alien queen, standing tall and regal, her dark cloak flowing behind her like shadows. Her eyes glowed faintly, a piercing blue that seemed to look straight through him. She was a vision of power, her presence demanding respect even in the midst of chaos. The princess, still catching her breath, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the queen. Jake could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't just any queen. This was the ruler of the galaxy's most dangerous empire. The queen's eyes flickered to Jake, studying him. There was something about his stance, his strength, that seemed to stir something within her. Her lips parted slightly as she took a step toward him. Jake stood his ground, his mind racing. What was going on? Why had she come here? She was supposed to be on the other side of the battlefield, not here, the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The queen's gaze never wavered. You are the one they speak of in legends." Her voice was calm but filled with awe. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the whispers, the rumors about the human of legend, but he had never taken them seriously. It was just a story, wasn't it? A tale to inspire hope in a galaxy on the brink of war. But as he stood before this alien queen, he realized that the stories were not as distant as he had once thought. The queen's voice softened, a strange mix of curiosity and respect. The human of legend. The one who saved entire worlds and defeated armies alone. I thought it was a myth, but now I see it as true. Jake couldn't believe it. He'd only fought because it was his job, because his team needed him, and because the princess had been in danger. But this was something else entirely. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, his voice steady but uncertain. "I'm just a soldier. I'm no hero." The queen smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Jake feel uneasy. "You may not believe it, human, but you are the one the galaxy has been waiting for." She took a step closer, her gaze still locked onto him. "Your actions today. They have proven that the stories were not lies. You've done what no one else could." The princess stepped back, still in shock, as she watched the exchange unfold. Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the queen's words. The entire galaxy, the entire universe, had been waiting for him. It was hard to wrap his mind around. The queen's gaze softened for a moment, almost as if she were lost in thought. Then, just as quickly, her eyes hardened. "There is something you need to understand, human. You are not just a soldier. You are the key to this galaxy's future." Jake furrowed his brow. "I don't understand." The queen took a deep breath, her voice calm and commanding once more. I am the queen of this empire, but my people are on the brink of destruction. The warlords are tearing us apart, and we are losing. She looked him up and down, her eyes glowing with something Jake couldn't quite place. You have something the others do not. A power, a strength that can change everything. You are the one who will turn the tide. Jake's mind spun.
He
Was just a man, just a soldier. He had no special powers, no hidden abilities. He had only survived the battle because of luck, training, and the determination to protect his team. But the way the queen was looking at him, it was as if she saw something more. You want me to fight for you? Jake said, his voice low. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. The queen nodded, her gaze intense. Yes, you are the one who can defeat my enemies. You are the one who can restore peace to the galaxy. Jake's heart sank. This wasn't what he signed up for. He had never wanted to be a hero, let alone the key to an entire galaxy's survival. But as the queen spoke, Jake realized that there was no way out. The galaxy was in chaos, and if he didn't step up, if he didn't play the part the queen was asking him to play, there would be nothing left to save. I don't know if I'm the one you think I am, Jake said, his voice heavy. But if there's a chance to save this galaxy, I'll take it. The queen smiled, a small, satisfied smile that made Jake's heart beat faster. She had won. He had agreed. Good. You will fight by my side, and together we will destroy the warlords who threaten everything we've built. Jake didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead. He was just one man, after all. How could he possibly stop an empire of warlords? How could he lead an army when he had never been more than a soldier? But the queen was right about one thing. This wasn't just any battle. It was the battle for the future of the galaxy. The queen stepped closer, her presence almost overwhelming. You will have to learn the ways of my people. You will have to become more than just a soldier. You will have to become a leader. And if you fail... Her voice grew cold, her eyes narrowing. I will destroy everything you care about. Jake nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had no choice but to accept the queen's challenge. There was no turning back now. Where do we start? Jake asked, his voice steady, even though his mind was racing. The queen's lips curled into a smile. We start by making you the most feared warrior the galaxy has ever known. And with that, Jake's fate was sealed. Jake wasn't sure what to think of the queen's offer. She spoke with such confidence, as if the future of the galaxy depended entirely on him. But he was just one man, a soldier with no special powers. Sure, he had survived impossible battles, but that didn't make him a legend, did it? The queen's eyes never left him. There was something almost unnerving about the way she studied him, as if she were trying to see inside his very soul. Jake had to admit he didn't like the idea of being used as a tool for someone else's war. But there was something else, too. A sense of responsibility. If what she said was true, if he could really turn the tide of this war, maybe he had to try. Maybe he was the one who could make a difference. Let's get something straight, Jake said, breaking the silence. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this to save the galaxy. The queen's lips curved into a knowing smile. That's the spirit, human, but make no mistake. You're going to need me if you want to survive. Jake didn't answer. Wasn't sure if he believed that. Still, there was no way out now. The battle was far from over, and the galaxy was in danger. If he didn't fight, who would? The queen turned away from him, her cloak flowing behind her like a shadow. Come, she said. I will introduce you to my council. They need to. See you understand who you are. Jake followed her, his mind racing. The queen led him into the heart of the empire's capital, a towering fortress built from dark, smooth stone. The walls were lined with glowing symbols, and the air hummed with power. This was no ordinary building. This was the seat of a vast, ancient empire that had seen countless wars and conquered countless worlds. Inside, a group of advisors waited. They stood in a circle, their faces unreadable, their eyes hard as they sized Jake up. He could feel their eyes on him, weighing him, judging him. It made him feel small. But he stood tall, holding his ground. The queen's voice rang out, strong and clear. This is Jake, the human of legend. The room fell silent. The advisors exchanged looks, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "You truly believe this man is the one?" one of the advisors asked. He was tall, with pale blue skin and sharp features. His voice was deep, tinged with skepticism. The queen nodded without hesitation. "I have seen it with my own eyes. He defeated the warlord at our gates with ease. He fought like a warrior of ancient prophecy. He is the one who will save us." Jake looked around the room at the alien council. These beings had been at the heart of the empire for centuries. Some of them looked proud, others doubtful. He could tell they weren't sure whether to trust the queen's words, and he wasn't sure he trusted them either. He had never been one to rely on anyone but himself. The advisor who had spoken earlier stepped forward. If he is truly the human of legend, then he must prove himself. "We cannot risk everything on a legend. There must be a test." Jake clenched his fists. "I'm no legend. I'm a soldier. I don't need to prove anything to you." The room tensed. "The queen?" shot Jake a sharp look, but he didn't back down. He wasn't going to let these aliens push him around. Not now. Not ever. "I agree with Jake," the queen said, her voice carrying authority. "This is not about legends. This is about survival. We don't have time for tests and games." Jake couldn't help but notice how the queen's voice had a calming effect on the advisors. They nodded reluctantly, and the tension in the room seemed to ease. "Very well," the blue-skinned advisor said. "But know this, human. If you fail us, the consequences will be dire." Jake met his gaze. "I won't fail," the queen smiled, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Good. Then we move forward." The council meeting continued, but Jake's mind wasn't entirely on the discussions. He couldn't help but think about the strange connection he had with the queen. There was something powerful about her, something that drew him in. But there was also something cold, something calculating, lurking behind her gaze. He had to be careful. He couldn't trust her completely, not yet. Later that day, Jake found himself in the queen's private chambers, sitting across from her at a long, dark table. The walls were lined with alien artifacts, each one telling a story of a long-forgotten civilization. The queen studied him carefully, her eyes never leaving his. "Do you understand what I've asked of you?" she asked, her voice low. Jake nodded. "I think so. You want me to lead your forces against the warlords, right?" The queen leaned forward, her face serious. "Not just lead, but you must become one of us. You must learn our ways, our tactics. You must understand what it means to fight for something greater than yourself." Jake frowned. "I'm not one of you. I'm just a soldier." The queen smiled, her expression softening. "That's where you're wrong. You have the strength inside you to lead. Just have to believe in it." Jake looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of her words. He had never considered himself a leader. He was just a soldier, a man who followed orders. But the queen was right about one thing. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to stop the warlords, he would need to become more than he was. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jake admitted. "I don't know if I can be the leader you think I am." The queen's gaze softened, her voice gentle. "No one is born a leader, but the greatest leaders are those who rise to the occasion when it matters most. You will find your strength when you need it. I believe in you, Jake." Jake swallowed hard. He wasn't used to hearing those words. He wasn't used to being told that he could change the galaxy. Somehow in this moment he believed her. But just maybe he could become the leader they needed. "We'll see," Jake said, his voice steady. The queen nodded, her eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "Yes, we will." Jake woke up before dawn, the light from the twin moons casting a pale glow over the training grounds. The cold air bit at his skin, but it felt good, refreshing. His body had been aching from the intense training over the past week, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The queen had made it clear that he was their only hope. He had to prove himself. He had learned that the queen's empire was vast, hundreds of planets under her control, but it was being torn apart by warlords who sought to conquer the galaxy. These warlords were ruthless, and the queen's forces had been losing ground for years. Now, she was placing her trust in Jake's, someone who had never led an army, never commanded a fleet, and never had to fight on a scale like this. Jake wasn't sure what the queen saw in him, but he had no choice. If he didn't help her, everything they had fought for would be lost. He walked through the training grounds, where soldiers from all over the galaxy were sparring. There were aliens of all shapes and sizes, each one a skilled warrior. They were tough, strong, and fast qualities Jake admired but didn't yet possess. His human body wasn't built for this kind of warfare. But he was learning fast. One of the Queen's generals, a tall alien with silver skin and a stern face, approached him. "Are you ready for today's challenge, human?" the general asked, his voice gruff. Jake nodded. "I'm ready." The general gave him a sharp look, as if judging whether Jake truly understood what that meant. "You'll lead a small group in a mock battle today. It's your chance to prove that you can command, that you can make decisions on the fly. If you fail—" He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. "You'll have to leave. Can't afford weak leaders." Jake clenched his jaw. He had come too far to back out now. "I won't fail." The general said nothing but turned and walked toward the battlefield, where a group of soldiers was already gathered. Jake followed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. If he couldn't lead, if he couldn't prove that he had what it took, everything would fall apart. He stood in front of the soldiers, all of them staring at him, waiting for orders. He had never led a group before, let alone trained soldiers from other species. There were aliens here with powers and skills far beyond his own, yet somehow he had to make them follow him. "Today we'll face an enemy force," Jake began, his voice steady but lacking the confidence he felt inside. "We need to work together, fight as one. We won't win this with strength alone. We need strategy." He looked around at his soldiers. There was a mix of disbelief and curiosity in their eyes. They were used to leading themselves to fighting, without anyone telling them what to do. But Jake had learned something in his brief time with the Queen's forces. It wasn't just about power. It was about unity. If he could unite these soldiers, they would be unstoppable. The general raised his hand, signaling the start of the exercise. The mock battle began, and Jake had to act fast. The enemy forces, made up of the Queen's own soldiers, acting as the opposing side, rushed toward them in a flurry of movement. Jake had trained for this moment, but it felt different now that he was in charge. "Move out. Flank left," Jake shouted, pointing toward a group of soldiers on the right. He had no time to second-guess himself. His orders had to be clear and fast. His team followed his lead, moving into position. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. He could hear the sound of weapons clashing in the distance, the hum of energy shields activating as his soldiers engaged the enemy. Jake kept moving, coordinating the team, adjusting the strategy as the battle unfolded. For a moment, it seemed like they were losing ground. The enemy was tough, and they had superior numbers. Jake's heart raced, but he refused to panic. Scanned the battlefield, looking for an opening. There, a small gap in the enemy's defense. If they could break through there, they could turn the tide. "Push forward, through the gap," Jake ordered. His soldiers moved with precision, their training kicking in. The gap widened as they pressed forward, and Jake saw the enemy falter. They weren't expecting such an aggressive push. Jake smiled. Out. This was it. They had them. The general, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. His eyes locked on Jake. "Well done, human," he said, his voice grudgingly impressed. Jake didn't have time to savor the victory. The battle wasn't over. Yet, his soldiers continued to press forward, but the enemy wasn't giving up. They were regrouping, preparing for a counterattack. "Hold the line, no one gets through," Jake shouted, his voice cut through the chaos, and his soldiers obeyed. Without hesitation, they stood their ground, fighting as one. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. It was everything he had learned, everything he had trained for. All coming together. In the end, his team emerged victorious. They had fought hard, but it was Jake's strategy that had won the day. The general approached him, nodding in approval. "You did well, human," the general said, his voice softening. "You've proven yourself today, but this is just the beginning." Nodded, exhaustion settling over him. "I know, but I'm ready. I won't stop until we win." Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The days had passed quickly since the mock battle, and he had earned the trust of the Queen's forces. He had proven himself as a leader, someone who could think fast and make difficult decisions under pressure. But as the days wore on, something in the air felt different, tense. Like a storm was coming. He spent most of his time in the Queen's war room, planning their next moves, studying maps of enemy territory. But there was always a sense of unease. The soldiers had been trained well, but Jake knew they needed more than just tactics. They needed unity, and that was something he couldn't create overnight. Trust had to be earned, and he could feel that trust wavering every time the generals gave him a hard look or whispered behind his back. It was late one evening when Jake found himself in the Queen's chambers, discussing the next phase of their plan. The princess had been by his side, offering advice, helping him navigate the complexities of leadership. Despite the chaos, they had formed a bond, one built on mutual respect and trust. But tonight, the princess seemed more distant than usual. "Jake," the Queen said, her voice sharp. She stood by a large map, her fingers tracing over the red lines marking the enemy's territory. "We need to move quickly.
Ow.
The warlords are regrouping, and we can't afford to wait any longer."
Ow.
Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the map. "I agree." "We can't do this with just a handful of soldiers," the Queen's eyes narrowed, a slight frown tugging at her lips. "You don't understand. Time is running out. We cannot wait for more troops. The warlords will attack soon, and we need to strike first." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her tone, something that didn't sit right with him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Are you saying we'll go in with less than we need?" The Queen's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "You need to trust me, Jake. You've proven yourself in battle. Now, you must trust that I know what's best for this empire." Jake stood up from the table, his mind racing. The Queen had always been confident, but tonight there was something different. It felt as though she was pushing him into something dangerous. Before Jake could respond, the door to the chamber burst open. A guard stood in the doorway, his face pale. "Your Majesty," the guard said, his voice trembling, "there's been a betrayal." Jake's stomach dropped. He exchanged a quick glance with the princess, who looked just as shocked. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice steady, despite the rising panic. "The generals," the guard said. "They've turned against you. They're planning to take control of the army, to overthrow the Queen." Jake's mind raced. Betrayal. It had to be a trap. The generals who had seemed so loyal to the Queen, so quick to follow his orders, they were plotting against her. "Where are they?" Jake demanded, his voice filled with urgency. "They're gathering in the lower levels," the guard replied, his voice low. "They've already taken control of several key areas. We need to act fast." Without hesitation, Jake turned to the Queen. "We need to stop them," he said, his voice firm. The Queen nodded, but her expression was unreadable. "You should go," she said coldly. "Handle this. I will stay here and organize the rest of our forces." Jake didn't question her. He didn't have time. The betrayal was happening now, and he couldn't afford to waste another second. He turned to the princess. "Stay here. It's too dangerous." She opened her mouth to protest, but Jake cut her off. "No time. I'll be back." As Jake ran through the palace halls, his heart pounded in his chest, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The generals had been allies. They had fought alongside him, trained with him. How could they betray the Queen like this? He reached the lower levels of the palace, his hand gripping the hilt of his blaster tightly. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing moment. Jake's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. He rounded the corner and saw them, several of the Queen's generals, standing in a circle, talking in hushed voices. The air between them was thick with tension. Jake moved quietly, staying hidden in the shadows. "The Queen is weak," One of the generals was saying. She's losing control. Can take over now, with or without her. Jake's stomach churned. He had been right. They were planning to overthrow the queen. But why? What had changed? The general continued. We'll need the human out of the way. He's too powerful, too unpredictable. Jake felt a flash of anger surge through him. He had always known that his position was precarious, but he hadn't realized the generals saw him as a threat. One of the generals turned, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had been spotted. Get him, the general shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. He fired quickly, taking down the first two generals with precise shots. The others scrambled to defend themselves, but Jake was faster. He moved like a shadow, slipping through their ranks and knocking them out one by one. But even as he fought, doubt crept into his mind. These were the people he had fought beside. These were the ones he had trusted. It wasn't until the last general fell that Jake realized what he had done. He had just taken down the queen's closest allies, the very people who had stood by her for years. The realization hit him hard. What had started as a fight for survival had become something far darker. Breathing heavily, Jake turned to the fallen generals. He had no idea how many of them had truly betrayed the queen, or if they had been manipulated. But one thing was clear. He couldn't trust anyone now, and the galaxy's fate, and his own, rested on the choices he made from here on out. Jake walked back to the queen's chambers, his mind heavy with the weight of what had happened. The betrayal hadn't come from the enemy, it had come from within. When he arrived, the queen was waiting for him, her face still unreadable. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She knew. You did well, the queen said, her voice calm. But the warlords aren't our only enemy. There are those within my own ranks who want power. It will not stop. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of what had just unfolded. The fight was far from over. Now Jake wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for the queen's throne and for the future of the galaxy. The moonlight shone brightly through the tall windows of the queen's chamber, casting long shadows across the room. Jake stood by the large, ancient-looking table, his mind focused on the battle ahead. The betrayal of the generals had shaken him, but now was not the time for doubt. The warlords had gathered their forces, and the time to strike was fast approaching. He could feel the weight of the queen's gaze on him as she stood in the corner of the room, eyes never leaving him. She had become a figure of authority, a person Jake felt he could no longer read. He wasn't sure if she was truly on his side, but for now, they had to fight together. Jake turned to face her. The generals are gone. You have control again. The queen nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes, but not all of them were loyal. There are still those who want to see me fall. The warlords are ready to strike, and they will not hesitate to take everything we've built. We need to end this now. Jake felt a fire stir inside him. He'd been thrown into a war that wasn't his own, but now it was. The betrayal had made him realize that the galaxy's future was in his hands. He had been given a chance to be more than just a soldier. He could change everything. We'll end it, Jake said, his voice steady, filled with determination. We have the strength. We just need to push forward. The queen stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. You've shown me that you have the heart of a leader. This fight will decide the galaxy's future. And whether you like it or not, you are the key. Jake wasn't sure if he was ready to accept the title of leader, but there was no turning back. He had come this far. He had made enemies and friends along the way. But the future of the galaxy depended on what he did next. The queen gave him a slight smile, but it was filled with complexity. I'm trusting you with everything now. Don't let me down. The final battle would take place on the warlord's homeworld, a dark, oppressive planet surrounded by a powerful fleet. The plan was simple: infiltrate their stronghold, defeat the warlord leaders, and break their hold on the galaxy. It was a mission that would either save or destroy everything they had fought for. The morning of the battle arrived. Jake's mind raced with thoughts of strategy, his hands gripping the controls of the ship's command console. The Queen's fleet was assembled, ready for the attack. He stood before the soldiers, all of them looking to him for guidance. They had followed him this far, and now they needed his leadership more than ever. "We do this together," Jake called out, his voice strong and clear. "We fight for the galaxy, for peace, and for the future of our people. We won't stop until we've won. We are not just soldiers, we are the ones who will shape what comes next." The soldiers cheered, their spirits lifted by his words. They were ready. But Jake knew that leadership wasn't just about speeches. It was about making the right decisions under pressure, about leading with conviction, fighting for something bigger than himself. The fleet soared through the blackness of space, moving toward the warlord's stronghold. As they neared the planet, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The enemy fleet waited for them, its ships like shadows in the distance. The battle had begun. Jake's ship entered the atmosphere first, with the Queen's flagship following, close behind. The sky above the planet was dark, clouds swirling like storm clouds. The enemy's defenses were fierce, but Jake and his team had trained for this. They knew the risks, and they were ready to face whatever came their way. The battle raged in the skies above the warlord's stronghold. Jake's ship weaved through enemy fire, dodging blasts and returning fire with precision. The Queen's forces were fierce, but Jake's leadership made all the difference. He ordered his team to press forward, to strike the heart of the enemies. "Defenses, push forward." Jake shouted over the comms, his voice steady. "Take out their defenses. We need to reach the command center." The soldiers under his command followed his lead without hesitation. The ground shook as the fleet engaged the warlord ships, massive explosions filling the sky. Jake's ship cut through the chaos, weaving in and out of enemy fire. His heart raced as he focused on the mission, his mind working through each move with a calm precision he never thought he had. The Queen's flagship moved in behind him, its massive weapons lighting up the sky. Together, they cut through the enemy defenses like a hot knife through butter. The warlords had underestimated them, thinking they could crush this small group of rebels. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. As they neared the warlord's stronghold, he could see it now, a massive fortress, built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by defensive turrets. This was it. It's the final stage of the battle. Jake and his team stormed the fortress, cutting through the enemy soldiers with fierce precision. It wasn't just about strength now. It was about strategy. Jake's mind worked quickly as he gave orders, guiding his soldiers to their targets. Every decision mattered. Every move could make the difference between victory and defeat as they reached the command center. Jake could see the warlord leader standing at the front, his face filled with contempt. Jake felt a surge of determination. This was the moment. This was what everything had been leading to. "You've come too late," the warlord leader sneered, his eyes cold. "This galaxy belongs to us now." Jake stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Not while I'm still standing." The final battle was swift and brutal. Jake's soldiers fought with everything they had, and soon the warlord leader was on. The ground defeated. The enemy was broken, and their hold on the galaxy shattered. As the battle ended and the dust began to settle, Jake stood amidst the ruins of the warlord's fortress, his heart still racing. The Queen stood beside him, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You did it," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You saved the galaxy." Jake looked around at the soldiers who had fought by his side, their faces filled with relief and triumph. They had won. The galaxy had been saved. But Jake knew this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about the future. He had become the leader they needed, not because of strength or power, but because of the choices he had made. And now, the galaxy would have a chance at peace. As the sun set over the warlord's stronghold, Jake looked up at the sky, knowing that the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, he felt like he was ready for whatever came next.